She heard him before she opened her eyes. Metal still ticked as it cooled. Something was leaking. Her head rang, but not enough to drown him out. "Please," he said. "Not to her. Not to anyone else." Just into the cracked space between them. "Not like this." His voice shook once, then steadied. He thought she couldn't hear him. She kept her breathing slow, shallow, careful. Someone outside was shouting for an ambulance. A child was crying somewhere behind him. He leaned closer. She could feel the warmth of him near her face. "I can't lose this job," he whispered. "I just got it back." Her fingers twitched, but she forced them still. He kept talking, and everything she thought she understood about the world shifted a few inches off-center. She was on the phone when it happened, not a personal call. It was one of those clipped conversations where nobody said hello, nobody asked how she was doing. Just numbers, percentages, deadlines. A man explaining why the deal had to close early, why the risk was manageable, why she should move fast. She was looking out the window of the car, half listening, half already deciding. The city light slid across the glass. Everything felt normal in that dull way that came from being protected by routine. Then the sound of tires skidding cut through the call. A sharp squeal, too close. Her eyes lifted. The world tilted. The impact didn't feel like one hit. It came in layers. The first jolt snapped her body forward. The second dragged her sideways. Metal screamed. Glass fractured. Something heavy slammed into her shoulder and kept pressing there like it wanted to pin her in place. The phone flew from her hand. Her head struck something hard. She didn't know what. The window frame, maybe. For a second there was no pain, only a flash of white behind her eyes. Then the pain arrived late, blooming slowly, as if her body had to think about it before allowing it in. She didn't scream. She didn't even move. Her mouth tasted like pennies. Blood. She could feel it on her lip. The car settled into silence, except it wasn't real silence. There were small sounds everywhere. Ticking metal. A faint hiss like air escaping. Distant horns that didn't stop because the city never stopped for anything. Her breathing was shallow. She tested it without meaning to. In, out. She was alive. The thought was flat. Not relief. Not gratitude. Just a fact, placed carefully in her mind like an object on a table. Outside, footsteps ran closer. Someone yelled. Someone else cursed. The door handle rattled. "Ma'am?" A man's voice called. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" His voice was close. Too close. Too close. He must have been leaning down near the broken window. She could smell him faintly, sweat, cheap soap, something metallic in the air. Panic. She could open her eyes. She knew that. She could speak, say her name, tell them she was fine, tell them she needed help. But something in her stayed still. Not because she was weak, not because she was confused, because she wanted to hear what came next. It was a strange instinct. It rose in her without permission, as natural as breathing. In her life, people only spoke freely when they thought they weren't being watched, when they thought she couldn't hear them, when they believed she wasn't paying attention. She kept her eyes closed. She let her face stay slack. She slowed her breath. The man's voice cracked. "Please, please don't be dead." There was no drama in the way he said it. It sounded like he hated himself for saying it at all, like the words slipped out before he could stop them. He swallowed hard. She could hear it. I didn't mean to." His breathing was uneven, too fast. She pictured his hands shaking as he hovered over her, unsure whether to touch her. "Brakes," he muttered. "I pressed the brakes." A pause. "I pressed them." He wasn't trying to convince her. He was trying to convince himself. She felt her shoulder throbbing now, deeper pain that spread slowly down her arm. Her neck felt stiff. The side of her face burned where something sharp had scraped it. She didn't move. Outside, someone shouted, "Call an ambulance." Another voice, female, louder, "Already did." The man near her didn't answer them. He stayed focused on her like the world had narrowed down into one unbearable point. "I can't lose this job," he whispered suddenly. The sentence landed heavier than it should have. She felt it. like a blunt object hitting somewhere inside her chest. He wasn't saying it to be selfish. That was the strange part. His voice wasn't cold. It wasn't calculating. It was raw, like a confession he couldn't hold in any longer. I just got it back, he added. His breath stuttered. I just got it back. For a moment she almost opened her eyes. Almost. Not out of pity. Out of irritation. The reflex of someone who's used to control. Used to people begging her for something. But then she heard something else. A child crying. Not far. Behind him. The sound was thin, frantic, like the child couldn't pull in enough air between sobs. Dad! The man turned so fast his shoes scraped against the road. I'm here, he said immediately. The panic in his voice shifted shape. It softened, like it had found something it was meant to protect. I'm here. Stay back, okay? Stay right there. The child kept crying. I'm scared, the small voice said. His answer came too quickly, like he'd already been holding it. I know. Just listen to me. Don't move. Don't come near the cars. Then he came back toward her. She could hear his steps again, heavier now, more desperate. His voice dropped. If she dies, he said, but didn't finish. He exhaled shakily. If she dies, I'm finished. She didn't like the way that sounded. Not because it was about her. Because it was true. If she died, he would be crushed. Not just by guilt, by the machine that came after guilt. Courts, headlines, lawsuits, the kind of punishment that didn't care whether he had meant it or not. He was thinking of his daughter, of rent, of food, of survival, not of her. And that was what unsettled her. Because she realized, lying there with blood on her mouth and glass in her hair, that he wasn't looking at her like she was a billionaire. He didn't even know who she was yet. He was looking at her like she was just a woman who might not wake up. The way normal people looked at each other. He whispered again, quieter. I swear I tried to stop. A long pause. I swear to God. The air outside was cold. She felt it on her skin through the broken window. Her body wanted to shiver, but she held it down. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat. Somewhere behind them, sirens started to rise. The man noticed them too. His breathing changed. Like the sound meant both relief and doom. He backed away a step. I'm not running, he said louder, to someone outside the car. I'm staying right here. Nobody answered him. But he said it again anyway, like he needed the words to exist. I'm not running. She wanted to open her eyes then. Not to reassure him, not to comfort him, to see him, to understand what kind of man stood beside a wrecked car, shaking, with a crying child behind him, and still chose not to disappear. The sirens got closer. Red light flickered across the inside of the car. Hands reached in. Someone's voice was right above her now. She's breathing, a paramedic said. Pulse is there. Another voice. Check her ID. She felt the faint pressure of fingers against her wrist, then the sound of her name. Not spoken casually. Spoken with a sudden sharpness. The air changed. The tone changed. Wait. She's that one. Even with her eyes closed, she felt it. Like a shift in gravity. People leaned in closer. Someone stepped back. Someone else reached for a phone. The man froze. She could hear his breathing stop for a second, and she knew exactly what was happening inside his head. He'd been afraid of losing his job. Now he was realizing the person in that car could erase his entire life with one statement. She stayed still. Just for another moment. Not because she needed to. Not because she was scared. Because she wanted to feel what it was like to hold that much power while lying on the edge of helplessness. Then she took a slow breath. Her eyelids fluttered. And she opened her eyes. The first thing she saw was the sky. Not the whole sky. Just a broken piece of it through shattered glass and flashing red light. It looked ordinary. Pale. Indifferent. Then faces leaned into view. A paramedic. Focused. Professional. Another one behind him. And just past their shoulders. Him. He looked younger than she expected. Early 30s maybe. Grease on his jacket sleeve. A thin cut near his eyebrow where he must have hit something. His hands were trembling, but he was trying to hide it by gripping them together. When her eyes opened fully, the shift was immediate. The paramedic's tone sharpened. "Ma'am, can you hear me? Stay with us." She blinked once. Slow. "I can hear you," she said. Her voice didn't sound like hers. It was lower, rougher, rougher. There was blood on her tongue. The man took a step back. Relief hit his face first. Clear, unfiltered. Then recognition. Someone had already said her name. He had heard it. His posture changed. Not much. Just enough. His shoulders tightened. His jaw locked. He knew now. She held his gaze for 1 second. Not longer. Long enough to see the calculation begin. Not manipulation. Not anger. Fear. They moved quickly after that. Hands steady. Straps tightened. Neck brace secured. She didn't resist. The pain in her shoulder sharpened when they shifted her onto the stretcher. It stole her breath for a moment. She didn't cry out. She didn't look away from him until the stretcher turned. He stood exactly where he said he would. Not running. A little girl clung to his leg, 7, maybe 8 years old. Her hair was messy, face wet with tears. She looked at the stretcher like it carried something sacred and dangerous at the same time. "Is she dead?" the girl asked. He swallowed hard. "No," he said. "She's awake." He didn't sound relieved anymore. He sounded aware. The ambulance doors closed. The city noise dulled. Inside, everything was white and controlled. The paramedic asked questions. She answered them evenly. Name. Age. Any allergies. Pain level. 7, she said when asked. It was probably an 8, but she didn't correct herself. She stared at the ceiling while they worked around her. Monitors beeped. Someone pressed gauze against her forehead. Her assistant would already know. Security would already be moving. Calls would be happening without her. She imagined her board's reaction. Legal teams. Risk assessments. And outside that moving machinery, one man standing beside a dented car. I pressed the brakes. His voice replayed in her mind. She closed her eyes again, but this time not to pretend. Just to think. At the hospital, everything sped up. Private room, immediate scans, specialists called in. She answered questions calmly. Memory intact. No blackout. Mild concussion. Dislocated shoulder. Cuts. Nothing fatal. Very lucky, one doctor said. She almost smiled at that. Luck wasn't something she had ever relied on. Her assistant arrived within the hour. Pale. Controlled panic under perfect posture. We're handling it, her assistant said quietly. Police are here. Legal is reviewing. We'll make sure. She interrupted. Where is he? Her assistant blinked. The driver? Yes, he's being questioned. Is he here? A pause. Yes. She nodded once. Don't press charges yet. Her assistant hesitated. That was unusual. We need to evaluate liability. I said not yet. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Later, when the police officer stepped into her room, his tone was careful. He says the brakes failed, the officer explained. We'll inspect the vehicle. There's no sign of intoxication. Speed appears within limit. And he stayed at the scene. Of course he did. The officer studied her face. Waiting. She imagined the headlines already forming. Billionaire injured in crash. Single father responsible. Negligence. Reckless. All it would take was one sentence from her. She saw again the girl's small hands gripping fabric. If she dies, I'm finished. She inhaled slowly. I'm not filing a complaint at this time, she said. The officer looked mildly surprised but nodded. Understood. After he left, the room felt too quiet. She asked for water. Her hand shook slightly when she lifted the glass. Not from fear. From the delayed shock her body was now allowing itself to feel. Pain settled deeper into her shoulder. Dull. Constant. For the first time since the crash, she let herself ask the question honestly. What if he hadn't tried? What if he was lying? She didn't like uncertainty. It irritated her more than pain. Get the vehicle inspected immediately, she told her assistant. Full mechanical report. Independent. Her assistant nodded. And find out about him, she added. Background? Yes. The word felt heavier than usual. Hours later, alone, she stared at the ceiling again. She kept replaying the moment before she opened her eyes. Not the crash. His whisper, I can't lose this job. It hadn't sounded greedy. It had sounded fragile. There was something about a person who feared losing stability more than punishment. Something honest in it. She had built her empire on eliminating fragility, removing weak links, cutting risk early. But this wasn't a weak link. This was a man who didn't run. She shifted slightly. The pain flared. Sharp reminder. Power had always felt clean to her. Linear. You decide. It happens. Tonight, it didn't feel clean. It felt like a weight placed carefully in her hands. If she pressed forward aggressively, he would collapse under it. If she stepped back completely, she might ignore something that needed accountability. She didn't want to destroy him, but she didn't want to be naive either. That balance irritated her. Outside her hospital room window, the city lights blinked steadily like nothing had happened. Her phone buzzed with messages she ignored. Instead, she thought about the way his voice changed when he spoke to his daughter. There'd been no calculation in that tone. Just instinct. She closed her eyes again. Tomorrow, there would be reports. Facts. Numbers. But tonight, there was only one undeniable truth. When he thought she couldn't hear him, he had stayed, and she couldn't stop thinking about that. She did not sleep much. Every time she drifted, the impact came back. Not the sound, not the metal, but the shift. That small tilt of control leaving her body. By morning, the hospital room felt smaller. Too white, too careful. Her assistant stood near the window with a tablet. The preliminary report is in, she said. She didn't sit up fully. The movement pulled at her shoulder. A slow burn. Say it. The brake line was worn, her assistant said. Severely, it should have been replaced months ago. A pause. The vehicle belongs to a logistics contractor. Whose contract? She asked. Another pause. Shorter. Ours. The word landed softly. But it stayed there. She looked at the ceiling, so it wasn't simple. It never was. Maintenance logs? She asked. Spotty, her assistant admitted. There are gaps. Cost cutting. It looks that way. She exhaled through her nose. Somewhere, someone had decided to delay replacing a brake line to save a number on a spreadsheet. Somewhere, that number had passed through meetings, projections, approvals. She had built systems to prevent waste, to maximize efficiency, to move faster than competitors. Efficiency always sounded clean. Until something broke. And him? She asked. Her assistant understood immediately. Name is Daniel Reyes, 34, divorced, one daughter, primary custody, works as a contracted driver, no prior offenses, no traffic violations in the past 5 years, no record of recklessness, no history of shortcuts, just a man in a worn truck with failing brakes. She nodded once. Is he still here? Yes. Why? He refused to leave until he knew you were alive. That tightened something in her chest. She didn't react outwardly. Has he contacted a lawyer? No. Has anyone contacted him? Not from us. Good. She shifted slightly, testing her arm. The sling felt restrictive. She disliked it. Arrange a meeting. Her assistant hesitated. Today? Yes. In private? Yes. Her assistant studied her for a second. Not questioning, just measuring. Understood. They brought him in that afternoon. Not to her hospital bed. She asked to be moved to a small consultation room, neutral space, a table between them. When he walked in, he looked like he hadn't slept either. He wore a clean shirt this time. Probably the only one without grease stains. His hair was still slightly uneven where dried blood had been washed away. He stopped just inside the room. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Up close, he looked younger than she thought the night before. Not inexperienced, just worn in a way that didn't match his age. His eyes flicked briefly to her shoulder brace, then back to her face. "I'm glad you're okay," he said. His voice was steadier now, not calm, contained. She watched him for a few seconds longer than polite. "You stayed," she said. He nodded once. "Yes, you could have left." Another nod, smaller. "I could have." He didn't offer an explanation. She appreciated that. Silence stretched between them. Not hostile, just heavy. He spoke first. "I checked the brakes last week," he said. "They felt soft. I reported it." "To who?" "My supervisor. And they told me it would be looked at." His jaw tightened slightly. "It wasn't." He didn't look angry when he said it. He looked tired. "Why didn't you refuse to drive it?" she asked. That question made him look at her differently. "Because I can't afford to refuse assignments," he said, simple, not defensive. She held his gaze. "If I had died," she said quietly, "what would you have done?" His breathing shifted. "I don't know," he admitted. That answer felt more honest than anything rehearsed. He swallowed. "I know it wouldn't have mattered what I meant, or what I tried to do." There it was. Awareness. "You think I would have destroyed you," she said. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. She leaned back slightly, ignoring the pull in her shoulder. "The brakes failed," she said. "Yes, because maintenance was delayed. Yes, under a contract owned by my company." His eyes flickered. That he hadn't known. He straightened just a little. "I didn't know that," he said. "I know." Silence again. She watched him process it. Not with anger. Not with triumph. With confusion. "This isn't about blame," she said finally. His expression tightened at that word. It always was, usually. She folded her hands carefully on the table. "I wanted to hear you speak when you didn't think I was listening." That made him frown slightly. "I was conscious," she added. His eyes widened. "Just barely." "You were." "Yes." Color rose in his face. Embarrassment. Maybe shame. "You heard. I heard enough." He looked down at the table for a moment. When he looked back up, something had shifted. Not fear. Something more solid. "I meant what I said," he said. "I know." She let that sit between them. "You were worried about your job," she continued. "I was worried about my daughter," he corrected quietly. The correction wasn't aggressive. It was precise. That mattered. She nodded once. "I don't intend to press charges," she said. His shoulders dropped slightly before he could stop them. "Thank you," he said. She didn't react to the gratitude. "But," she added, and watched him brace himself again, "this situation isn't finished." He didn't look surprised. "It shouldn't be," he said. That answer surprised her. "You're not angry?" she asked. "At you?" He shook his head. "No." "Why not?" He held her gaze steadily now. "Because if the brakes had worked, we wouldn't be here." He wasn't asking for sympathy. He wasn't asking for protection. He was stating a fact. She studied him for a long moment. This wasn't a man trying to escape responsibility. This was a man trying to survive inside a system that didn't leave space for refusal. "You reported the brake issue," she said. "Yes." "Do you have proof?" "Yes." "Keep it." He blinked. "For what?" "For when I start asking questions." He didn't fully understand yet. That was fine. She stood slowly. The movement hurt. She didn't let it show. "This wasn't just your accident," she said. He watched her carefully. "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means," she said evenly, "someone above you decided that saving money mattered more than replacing a brake line." Silence filled the room again. "And I don't like that," she added. For the first time since he entered, he looked unsure of her. Not afraid, just uncertain of what she might do next. Good. She preferred that to fear. "Go home to your daughter," she said. He stood as well. He hesitated at the door. "Why?" he asked suddenly. "Why what? Why are you doing this?" She considered the question, not the public answer, the real one. "Because when you thought I was dying, you didn't run." But she didn't say that. Instead, she said, "Because this isn't finished." And that was true enough. After he left, the room felt colder, not because of the air conditioning, because the space he'd occupied was gone and she could hear herself again. The quiet returned like a weight settling onto her shoulders. Her assistant stepped in carefully, as if the meeting might have broken something. "How did it go?" she asked. She didn't answer immediately. She stared at the chair he'd sat in. The indentation in the cushion was still there. "He didn't lie," she said finally. Her assistant nodded, already half expecting that. "He's not trying to manipulate," she added. That part sounded almost like she was convincing herself. "Legal is asking if we should prepare a statement," her assistant said. She turned her head slightly. "No statement. They're concerned the media will find out." "They will," she said. Her assistant paused. "And when they do," she continued, "we will not speak first." That was not her usual strategy. She normally controlled the narrative early. She normally shaped the first wave before anyone else could. But this time, she wanted the truth to come out the slow way. The ugly way. The way it always did when nobody could polish it in time. She didn't tell her assistant that. Instead, she asked, "Who signed off on that maintenance contract?" Her assistant's eyes lowered to the tablet. "I can trace it." "Do it," she said. Then, quieter, "I want every name." The next 2 days were a blur of tests and questions. Doctors wanted to keep her longer. They were cautious. They used words like concussion protocol and risk of swelling. She agreed outwardly, but her mind wasn't in the hospital. It was in the maintenance logs. The missing entries. The worn brake line. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the little girl's face. Not her tears, just the way she'd held her father's leg, like she believed he was the only solid thing left in the world. She'd seen that grip before, not in children, in investors, in executives, in people who smiled and nodded in meetings while silently begging her not to change her mind. But this had been different. That child wasn't clinging to money. She was clinging to him, and he had stayed. He had stayed even when the world would punish him for it. By the third day, her phone was impossible to ignore. The first headline came from a smaller outlet. Then another. Then the larger ones picked it up. But they didn't have enough details yet, so they filled the empty space with familiar guesses. High-profile CEO injured in collision. Questions raised about safety standards. Driver at fault? The word fault appeared everywhere. Her assistant brought her the article summaries with the calm of someone who had been trained not to flinch. "They're speculating," her assistant said. "Let them," she replied. She scrolled through the photos. There was a blurred image of the crash site, a red circle around her car, an arrow pointing to the other vehicle. Then a clear shot of Daniel standing by the curb, holding his daughter's hand. His face was partially turned away, but she could still see the tension in his shoulders. A stranger would look at that picture and assume guilt. They always did. She stared at it for a long time. Something about the angle made him look smaller than he was, a man already being pushed into a story he hadn't written. She handed the phone back. "Find out if he's getting harassed," she said. Her assistant's brows lifted slightly. "You mean online, at home, at work?" Her assistant nodded, expression tightening. "I'll look into it." She didn't add anything else. She didn't want to admit how familiar this felt. Not the accident, the machine afterward. The way people with less power were always the easiest pieces to sacrifice. That evening, one of her lawyers came in person. He was older, silver-haired, polite in the way that suggested he never needed to raise his voice. His suit was perfect, his posture controlled. He greeted her warmly, then got to the point. "We should consider filing a civil claim," he said. "Not necessarily against the driver, but against the contractor. It establishes position early." She listened without interrupting. He continued, "It also protects you. If we don't act, it could look like admission of fault." She watched his mouth move. watched how easily he spoke about fault like it was a chess move. She didn't like him in that moment. Not personally, just what he represented. What would happen to the driver? She asked. He blinked once. Indirect consequences. He could be named. It's possible. It's likely, she corrected. He didn't argue. She leaned back slightly. The lawyer studied her. Are you concerned about him? I'm concerned about the truth, she said. The lawyer smiled faintly like he'd heard that line before. The truth is rarely clean, he said. She held his gaze. No, she said, but it exists. Silence. Then he adjusted his papers. If you don't want to pursue it now, we can delay. But the longer we wait, the harder it becomes to control the outcome. Control. That word again. She'd built her entire life on it. It had kept her alive. It had kept her on top. But she remembered Daniel's voice in the wreckage. I'm not running. He hadn't controlled anything. He'd simply chosen to stay. She looked back at her lawyer. I'm not trying to control the outcome, she said. I'm trying to understand who created the conditions for it. The lawyer's expression stayed polite, but something in his eyes tightened. That will require internal review, he said. Yes. And it could implicate people close to you. Yes. The lawyer hesitated. It could implicate you. She didn't flinch. If it does, she said, then it should. That was the moment he stopped speaking like he was advising her and started speaking like he was measuring her. Understood, he said finally. When he left, her assistant looked unsettled. You're making enemies, her assistant said quietly. She didn't deny it. I already had enemies, she replied. They were just quieter. The next morning she was discharged. A private car waited. Security. A driver who didn't speak. The normal routine returning like a skin she could slip back into. But it didn't feel normal. The streets looked the same. People walked. Stores opened. Traffic moved. And yet she kept noticing details she had never noticed before. The cracked sidewalk near the hospital entrance. The worn-out shoes on a man pushing a cart. A mother gripping her child's wrist too tightly. Not out of anger, but fear. It was like her mind had been forced to widen. Like she'd been living with blinders, and the crash had knocked them loose. At home, she stepped into her apartment and felt nothing. The space was immaculate, cold, designed. Every surface chosen, every piece of furniture placed with intention. But it didn't hold her. It didn't comfort her. It didn't comfort her. It just waited. She sat down slowly, wincing as her shoulder pulled. She stared at the city outside her window. Her assistant stood nearby, waiting for instructions. Any update on Daniel? She asked. Yes, her assistant said. His supervisor suspended him. Her jaw tightened. For what? They're calling it pending investigation. She exhaled, sharp. His daughter. She's fine. She was checked at the hospital, no injuries. She nodded once. The suspension didn't surprise her. It was predictable. Companies always did that, first remove the human liability before anyone asked deeper questions. Like cutting a loose thread so nobody noticed the fabric was rotten. She looked at her assistant. Arrange another meeting, she said. Her assistant blinked. With him? Yes. Legal will want to be present. They won't be. Her assistant hesitated. That could be risky. She didn't raise her voice. It already is risky, she said. For him. That ended the discussion. Her assistant left to make the call. She remained seated, staring at the glass wall of her apartment. She could see her own reflection faintly. Her hair was pulled back, her face still pale. A bruise darkened the side of her jaw. She looked like someone recovering. But inside, she didn't feel like she was recovering. She felt like she was waking up to something she'd spent years avoiding. Not guilt. Something worse. Responsibility. Not for the accident. For the system that made a man like Daniel whisper about losing his job while a woman might be dying in front of him. She closed her eyes for a moment, and in that darkness she heard his voice again. Not the panic, not the pleading, the steadier part. I was worried about my daughter. She opened her eyes. Her phone buzzed, a message from her assistant. He agreed to meet. She stared at the screen. Then she set the phone down. Her shoulder throbbed. Her body still hurt. But the discomfort didn't matter, because she knew something now. This wasn't going to end in court. It was going to end somewhere deeper. Somewhere she couldn't buy her way out of. She met him 2 days later. Not at her office. Not at the hospital. Not at any place that would feel like an advantage, even though advantage was unavoidable with her. She chose a small diner on the edge of the city. One of those places that smelled like coffee that had been sitting too long and grilled onions soaked into the walls. She arrived early, with one security guard in a car outside, and no one else. Inside, she sat in the back booth. The shoulder brace was hidden under a dark coat, but the stiffness still showed when she moved. She hated that. She hated anything that made her look fragile. The waitress came over, recognized her immediately, then tried not to. "What can I get you?" the woman asked, eyes darting away as if looking directly at her might cost something. "Coffee," she said. The waitress nodded too fast and left. She waited. She didn't check her phone. She didn't review reports. She didn't distract herself. When Daniel walked in, she noticed the hesitation before he even saw her. He paused by the entrance, scanning the room like he expected to be trapped. Like he expected cameras. Like he expected someone to jump out with a microphone and twist his face into tomorrow's headline. When he finally spotted her, he froze for a moment. Then he walked toward her. His posture was different than last time. Less frightened. More guarded. He slid into the booth opposite her but didn't take his eyes off her face. "You didn't bring lawyers," he said. "No," she replied. He nodded once, as if he'd expected that answer, but still needed to hear it. The waitress returned with coffee, poured it silently, then retreated like she wanted to escape the air around them. Daniel didn't touch the menu. He didn't touch the coffee either. He just sat there, hands clasped together, knuckles pale. "Why are we here?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. She studied his face, the faint bruise still visible near his eyebrow. He looked like someone who had been carrying exhaustion for years and had stopped expecting rest. "You were suspended," she said. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Yes." "How long?" "Until they decide they found someone else to blame," he said. His voice wasn't bitter, just flat. She nodded. "Have they contacted you?" "No one from the company. Only the insurance people. And reporters." He said reporters like it was a disease. She watched him carefully. "Have they come to your home?" He hesitated. "Once," he admitted. "A woman with a camera. My daughter opened the door before I could stop her." Something tightened in her chest. "Did they film her?" "Yes." He said it quietly, like he was ashamed he couldn't protect her from it. She took a slow breath. Her fingers tightened around the edge of her cup. "Has anyone threatened you?" she asked. He looked away. "That's not the right word," he said. "What is?" He looked back at her. "People saying they hope I rot," he said. "Messages. Calls. Someone left a note on my car." "What did it say?" His jaw tightened. He didn't repeat it. He didn't need to. She nodded once, as if she had expected it. She hated how predictable cruelty was. It always showed up fast. It always found the weakest place to press. Daniel shifted slightly in his seat, like he wanted to leave but couldn't. "You still haven't told me why we're here," he said. She looked at him. "Because I have your maintenance report," she said. His eyes flickered. "And I have the contract," she continued. "The one that put you in that truck." His hands tightened. "You said it was your company," he murmured. "It is." A long silence passed. He stared at the table like he was trying to keep himself from saying something he couldn't take back. Then he said, "So what happens now?" The question wasn't hopeful. It wasn't demanding. It was the question of a man who had lived long enough to know that good outcomes were rare. She leaned forward slightly, careful of her shoulder. "What happens now," she said, "depends on what you have." He frowned. "What I have?" "Proof," she said. "Messages. Reports. Anything you sent about the Briggs." His gaze sharpened. "I have a text," he said. "And an email. I forwarded it to myself." "Good," she replied. He watched her like he didn't trust the word good coming from someone like her. You're building a case, he said. Yes. He looked down again. And you're going to sue them, he said. The contractor. Maybe. He exhaled. That won't help me, he said quietly. They'll just replace them. Replace me? She didn't argue immediately. Instead, she asked, do you know who decided to delay maintenance? Daniel shook his head. No, that's above me. But you have a supervisor. Yes. What's his name? Daniel hesitated, then gave it. She memorized it instantly. He watched her eyes as she did, and she could see the moment he realized she was serious. Not sympathetic. Serious. And your supervisor reported to someone else, she continued. Probably. You know who? Daniel shook his head. He looked uncomfortable now, not because of fear for himself, but because he sensed what she was asking him to do. You want me to testify, he said. I want you to tell the truth, she replied. His eyes narrowed slightly. That's the same thing, he said. She didn't deny it. She took a sip of coffee. It was bitter, slightly burnt. She didn't mind. It matched the room. Daniel, she said, using his name for the first time out loud. He stiffened at the sound of it. She saw it. The way hearing his name in her voice felt like a warning. I'm not doing this to save you, she said. His face tightened. I'm doing it because I don't like what happened, she continued, and I don't like that it was normal enough for people to move on from it. He stared at her. His expression wasn't grateful. It was cautious. Why now? He asked. Why do you care now? She held his gaze. That question sat between them like a blade. She could have answered with a polished lie. She could have said she believed in justice, that she cared about employees, that she had always stood for safety standards. Those were the kind of things people said in press releases. She didn't say any of that. Instead, she said, because I heard you. His brows pulled together. What do you mean? She didn't look away. I heard what you said in the car, she told him. Before anyone knew who I was, before you knew. His face changed slowly. First confusion, then embarrassment, then something darker. You were awake, he said. Yes. He sat back, eyes narrowing. So you let me. He stopped, swallowed. So you listened, he finished. Yes. His jaw clenched. He looked away toward the window for a moment. The diner glass reflected traffic moving by outside. Ordinary people. Ordinary days. Then he looked back at her. That wasn't fair, he said. She nodded once. No, she agreed. It wasn't. That honesty surprised him. It surprised her too. He didn't respond right away. His fingers tapped once against the table, then stopped. What did you hear? He asked. She answered carefully. I heard you say you couldn't lose your job. His face tightened, shame rising. And I heard you say you weren't going to run, she continued. And you didn't. His eyes flickered. Something softened for a second, then hardened again. I wasn't thinking about being noble, he said. I was thinking about my kid. I know. He looked at her sharply. You don't? He said. Not really. That hit harder than she expected, not because it was cruel, because it was accurate. She had never had to think the way he thought. Not in years. Not since she'd climbed out of her own beginnings and buried them under work. She let the silence sit. Daniel's voice was quieter when he spoke again. If you're doing this, he said, it's going to get ugly. She nodded. I know. He stared at her, as if searching for the part of her that would flinch. You're going to burn people, he said. Yes. And they'll come after you. She didn't answer immediately. She looked down at her hands, pale against the coffee cup, still steady. Then she said, They already have. Daniel didn't understand what she meant, but he didn't ask. He looked tired again. The anger drained out of him as quickly as it had arrived. What do you want from me? He asked. Everything you have, she said. Texts, emails, names, dates, and I want you to stop speaking to reporters." He gave a humorless laugh. "I'm not speaking to them," he said. "They're speaking at me." "Then ignore them," she said. He stared at her. "You think it's that easy?" he asked. She didn't answer, because she knew it wasn't. But she also knew she could make it easier, and she hated herself a little for the fact that she hadn't thought of that sooner. She reached into her coat pocket and slid an envelope across the table. Daniel didn't touch it at first. He just looked at it like it might explode. "What is that?" he asked. "A private security contact," she said. "Someone who can keep them away from your home, especially your daughter." His eyes lifted. He looked at her like he couldn't decide if he should be insulted or relieved. "I can't pay for that," he said. "You won't," she replied. His expression tightened. "I don't want charity," he said. "It's not charity," she said. "It's damage control for both of us." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once, slowly. He picked up the envelope. His hands were still shaking, but less now. The waitress walked past, glanced at them, then kept going. The diner felt like it was holding its breath. Daniel slipped the envelope into his jacket pocket. Then he looked at her again. "If you're doing this," he said quietly, "don't stop halfway." She stared at him. There was no pleading in his tone, no manipulation, just a warning. She nodded. "I won't," she said. And she meant it. Not because she was trying to prove something, because she could already feel what would happen if she didn't. She would go back to her apartment, back to her boardroom, back to the clean version of her life, and she would never stop hearing his voice in the wreckage. "I can't lose this job." That sentence would follow her forever. So she sat there, in the smell of old coffee and fried food, and realized something she hadn't expected. She wasn't doing this because she was kind. She was doing it because she couldn't live with herself if she didn't. Daniel stood up. He didn't offer his hand. He didn't thank her again. He simply nodded once, like he was marking a decision. Then he walked out of the diner. She watched him leave, and for the first time since the accident, she felt a small, clear certainty settle in her chest. This was no longer about an accident. This was about what came after, and she had already crossed the point where she could pretend it wasn't her responsibility. The documents arrived that night. Not through her assistant. Not through legal. Daniel sent them himself. A forwarded email. A screenshot of a text message. A maintenance request form with a timestamp from 3 weeks before the crash. Subject line: brake pressure inconsistent. Urgent check needed. The reply beneath it was short. Noted. Schedule tight this week. Will review next cycle. Next cycle. She read that line 3 times. Her shoulder ached where the sling pressed into her neck. She ignored it. The pain felt deserved somehow. Honest. She forwarded the files to her assistant with one instruction. Trace chain of approval. Quietly, within 48 hours, the picture began to form. The contractor had been under pressure to reduce operating costs. Her company had demanded it. Quarterly performance reviews had highlighted maintenance optimization. That phrase appeared in 3 internal memos. Maintenance optimization. She stared at the words until they lost shape. In one email thread, a regional operations director had written, "Minor brake wear can be monitored. No need for immediate replacement unless failure imminent." Unless failure imminent. She leaned back slowly in her chair. The apartment was silent except for the faint hum of city traffic outside. Failure imminent. How did someone measure that? By feel? By hope? Her assistant stood across from her, tablet in hand. "The directive came from 2 levels above the contractor," her assistant said carefully. "Indirectly, but clearly." "Names," she said. Her assistant listed them. People she had hired, people she had promoted, people she had praised for cutting costs without cutting performance. Her jaw tightened. "They didn't report the brake request upward?" she asked. "It doesn't appear so." "Why?" "Because it would have reflected poorly on their cost reduction metrics." There it was. Metrics. She had built an empire on numbers that moved in the right direction. Upward. Always upward. She walked to the window slowly, the sling pulling against her collarbone. The city lights were sharp against the dark. Somewhere in that sprawl, Daniel was probably sitting at a small kitchen table, his daughter doing homework. A suspension notice folded beside him. She imagined him checking the door twice before going to bed, all because someone decided next cycle was good enough. Her assistant broke the silence. Legal is requesting guidance. If we proceed, it will trigger internal audits. There will be resistance. From who? Senior leadership. They'll argue this was a contractor oversight. She turned. Was it? She asked. Her assistant didn't answer, because they both knew the truth. The culture that demanded optimization had come from the top. From her. She never told anyone to ignore breakware, but she had told them to move faster, spend less, beat competitors. And somewhere along the chain, safety had become negotiable. Not in words, in practice. She returned to her desk and sat down carefully. Schedule a board meeting, she said. Her assistant stiffened slightly. Full board? Yes. And the agenda? Operational review. That won't cover. It will, she said quietly. Her assistant hesitated. This will affect stock value, she said. I know. It could trigger investigations. I know. Silence. Her assistant studied her face, searching for hesitation. There wasn't any. Understood, her assistant said finally. When she left, the apartment felt larger than before. Empty in a different way. She looked down at the screenshot Daniel had sent. His message to a supervisor read, Brakes feel soft. Pedals sinks lower than normal. I don't think this should wait. It was polite. Not dramatic. Not demanding. Just a man noticing something wrong. And someone else deciding it wasn't urgent enough. She pressed her fingers against her temple. For years she had believed she could separate herself from the consequences of execution-level decisions. She set direction. Others handled details. That had always felt reasonable. Until the detail hit her car at 40 miles per hour. Her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. They're asking me to sign a statement. Says brakes were functioning within acceptable tolerance. Her jaw tightened. Don't sign anything, she typed back. The reply came quickly. If I don't, they'll terminate me permanently. She stared at the screen. There it was. The choice he had been forced into. Lie quietly. Keep income. Tell the truth. Lose stability. She thought of the diner. If you're doing this, don't stop halfway. Her fingers hovered over the screen for a moment. Then she called him instead. He answered on the second ring. Hello. Don't sign it, she said. A pause. You don't understand, he replied quietly. I need this job. I understand exactly, she said. Silence. Then he exhaled slowly. What happens if I don't? He asked. You'll be protected, she said. How? I'll make sure of it. Another pause. That's not an answer, he said. No, it wasn't. It was a promise. She didn't make promises lightly. Daniel, she said evenly, if you sign that paper, they bury this. Not just for you, for everyone driving those trucks. He didn't respond immediately. She could hear faint noise in the background. A television. Maybe his daughter moving around. They'll find someone else, he said finally. Someone who needs the money more than I do. That sentence hit harder than anything else he'd said. Because it was true. There was always someone more desperate. That was how systems survived. They're betting you'll choose survival, she said quietly. And you're asking me not to, he replied. Yes. Silence stretched between them, long enough that she wondered if the call had dropped. Then he spoke. If I don't sign it, he said, you don't get to back out. She didn't hesitate. I won't. Another pause. Then, okay. The word was steady. Not confident, but steady. I won't sign it, he said. She closed her eyes briefly. Good. She ended the call and sat there for a long time without moving. This was no longer theoretical. He had chosen risk, because she asked him to. If she failed now, It wouldn't just be her reputation damaged, it would be his life. She stood slowly and walked to the mirror in the hallway. The bruise on her jaw had darkened, yellow at the edges now, healing. She touched it lightly. The accident had been mechanical. What followed was human, and human damage was harder to repair. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was from one of the board members. Hearing rumors, call me. She didn't respond. Instead, she looked at her reflection. For years she had believed strength meant not flinching. Now she was learning it meant not stepping away. She walked back to her desk and opened the new document. Subject line: immediate suspension of cost optimization protocol. Fleet operations, she typed carefully. Direct. No corporate softness. Effective immediately. All maintenance deferrals are frozen pending audit. Any retaliation against reporting drivers will result in termination. She reread it once, then sent it. Within minutes, her phone lit up with incoming calls. She let it ring. Because somewhere across the city, a man had just refused to sign a lie, and if she didn't hold her ground now, she would prove him wrong for trusting her. Outside, traffic continued. People moved. The world didn't pause for internal reckoning, but inside her apartment, something had shifted permanently. This was no longer about cleaning up after an accident. It was about dismantling the quiet decisions that had made it inevitable, and she knew with a clarity that felt almost painful there would be consequences. For everyone, including her. The board meeting lasted 3 hours. No raised voices. No slammed fists. That wasn't how people at that level fought. They used calm tones and careful words. They smiled while measuring damage. She sat at the head of the table, shoulder stiff, bruise faint but still visible. No one mentioned it. They mentioned liability instead. Internal audit at this scale will trigger regulators, one board member said. Another leaned back in his chair. Investors won't like instability right now. Instability. She looked around the table at the polished wood, the filtered light, the quiet confidence in their posture. You prefer a wrongful death lawsuit? She asked evenly. A small silence followed. That's not what we're saying, someone replied. She folded her hands in front of her. Maintenance deferral protocols are suspended, she said, effective immediately. One of the senior executives shifted. With respect, that decision affects quarterly targets. She held his gaze. Good. The room went still. She wasn't angry. She wasn't emotional. Her voice was level. That unsettled them more than outrage would have. We pushed efficiency beyond safety margins, she continued. You all signed off on it. So did I. A few eyes dropped. There it was. The part they hadn't expected. Accountability that included her. This isn't about optics, she said. It's about structural negligence. The word landed hard. One board member cleared his throat. Negligence implies legal exposure. Yes, she said. Silence again. She could almost feel the internal calculations happening. Stock impact. Media fallout. Leadership perception. Why escalate this? Someone asked finally. The driver was at fault operationally. No, she said. The firmness in her voice cut through the room. The brake line was worn. A repair request was ignored. That is, operational failure, not his. She didn't mention Daniel's name. She didn't need to. One executive leaned forward. Are you suggesting we publicly admit oversight? I'm suggesting we correct it before someone dies. That quieted them. Because the truth was simple. She had survived. Next time, someone might not. The meeting ended without resolution, but she had forced the line to be drawn. That evening, her assistant handed her a file. Termination letters drafted, she said carefully, for the regional operations director and 2 supervisors. She took the file. She read each letter slowly. The language was clean, professional, no emotion. Failure to uphold safety standards, breach of internal policy, immediate dismissal. She signed them. Her hand didn't shake. But afterward, she didn't feel satisfaction. Just wait. She remembered what Daniel had said in the diner. You're going to burn people. Yes, she was. But they weren't powerless men with children at home and no leverage. They had chosen numbers over risk warnings. She closed the file. Have they contacted Daniel again? She asked. No, her assistant said. After your directive went out, they stopped. Good. And the media? They're escalating. Some are framing this as corporate cover-up. Others are calling you reckless for initiating internal review. She nodded once. They can decide later, she said. Her assistant hesitated. You don't seem concerned. She almost smiled. I am, she said. Just not about what they think. She met Daniel again, this time at her office. Not the main conference room. A smaller space, glass walls, city visible below. He looked uncomfortable stepping into her world. The floors were too polished, the air too filtered, the silence too intentional. He didn't sit until she did. They asked me to come back to work, he said without preamble. Her eyes narrowed slightly. When? This morning? On what terms? They said investigation ongoing, but suspension lifted. She nodded. They terminated your supervisor, she said. His eyes widened. And the regional director, she added. He stared at her. You did that, he said quietly. Yes. A strange expression crossed his face. Not triumph, not relief, something closer to unease. I didn't ask for that, he said. I know. Silence filled the room. He walked to the glass wall and looked down at the city. Those men have families too, he said. She stood slowly, shoulder tight. They made a decision, she replied. So did you, he said, that landed harder than he intended. She stepped closer, but not too close. Yes, she said. He turned to face her. I don't want revenge, he said. This isn't revenge. It looks like it. She studied him carefully. You think I did this because of the accident? He didn't answer. You think this is personal? His jaw tightened. Isn't it? He asked. She shook her head slowly. If this were personal, she said, you would be unemployed. Silence. He held her gaze. The truth of that sat between them. I did this, she continued, because the next driver who reports brake failure deserves to be taken seriously. His expression shifted slightly. He wasn't used to someone in her position speaking like that. You're risking your own people, he said. Yes. For me? No. She didn't hesitate. For the system, he almost laughed at that. You sound like you're trying to fix the world. I'm trying to fix a policy, she replied. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he asked something softer. Why does it matter so much to you? She thought about lying, about saying something clean. Instead she said, because I built part of it. His eyes held hers, and for the first time, she didn't feel like the powerful one in the room. She felt exposed. He nodded slowly. I didn't think people like you admitted that, he said. Most don't, she replied. He studied her face. You're going to get pushback, he said. I already am. And if it costs you? She didn't answer immediately. Her company was worth billions. Her name carried weight in markets. But reputations were fragile. And boards replaced CEOs when numbers dipped too far. If it costs me, she said finally, then it costs me. He stared at her. Then he nodded once. Slow, like he was accepting something he hadn't expected to. Outside the glass wall, traffic moved below. Tiny cars, tiny lives. You didn't have to do this, he said. She looked at him. Yes, she said quietly. I did. Because if she hadn't, she would have gone back to meetings and margins and forgotten the sound of his voice in that wrecked car. And she didn't want to be the kind of person who could forget that. Daniel moved toward the door. He paused with his hand on the handle. They're not going to forgive you for this, he said. She almost smiled. I'm not asking them to. He held her gaze for 1 second longer. Then he left. She stood alone in the glass room, the city stretching endlessly beneath her. For years she had believed control meant distance. Now she was standing in the consequences of closing that distance. And she knew this wasn't over. It was only moving into a harder phase because changing policy was one thing. Changing culture was something else entirely. The pushback didn't come all at once. It came in pieces. A quiet call from a major investor asking whether she had lost perspective. An article suggesting she was staging moral theater to distract from internal mismanagement. A private message from a board member advising her to stabilize optics before markets react further. Stabilize optics. She read that phrase twice and set the phone down. Optics were for people who believed the surface mattered more than the structure. The stock dipped. Not dramatically. Just enough to be noticed. Enough for financial news anchors to raise their eyebrows and speculate about leadership volatility. She went to work anyway. No press conferences, no public apologies, just internal audits, compliance restructuring, and a permanent shift in maintenance reporting protocols that bypassed mid-level filtering. Drivers could now escalate safety issues directly to a centralized review team, anonymous if necessary. The proposal triggered resistance. Middle managers called it excessive, costly, unnecessary duplication, one memo read. She approved it without comment. 3 weeks after the accident, she received a formal request from the board, closed session. Performance review. She expected it. She walked into the room alone. No assistant. No legal team. Just her. The chair of the board folded his hands carefully. Your recent actions have caused turbulence, he began. I'm aware, she replied. There are concerns about strategic direction. Safety compliance is not a strategic deviation, she said calmly. It's a baseline requirement. A few exchanged looks. That isn't the issue, another board member said. The issue is scale. You've initiated structural reforms without phased planning. I initiated them because delay creates risk, she replied. Risk to whom? Someone asked. To everyone, she said. Silence. Then the chair leaned forward slightly. Is this about the accident, he asked. She met his gaze. Yes. A pause. That was unfortunate, he said, but survivable. She held his eyes. For me, she said. The air shifted. She didn't raise her voice. If the brake line had snapped differently, we wouldn't be having this conversation, she continued. We would be having the memorial. No one interrupted her. The driver reported the issue, she added. It was ignored because our culture rewarded cost reduction over preventative maintenance. That's an oversimplification, someone objected. No, she said quietly. It isn't. Silence again. You're prepared to accept reputational damage for this? The chair asked. Yes. And if it costs you your position? She didn't hesitate. Yes. That answer lingered in the room, because it meant she wasn't negotiating. The chair leaned back slowly. We'll deliver it, he said. She nodded. And stood. She didn't wait for permission to leave. Outside the boardroom, she felt something unfamiliar. Not fear. Not relief. Exposure. For the first time in years, she had put something above her own authority. She walked to her office without speaking to anyone, closed the door, stood by the window. The bruise on her jaw had faded almost completely now. Only a faint shadow remained. Her shoulder still hurt when she moved too quickly. Healing wasn't dramatic. It was gradual. Uncomfortable. She thought about Daniel. He had returned to work under probationary review. Some of his coworkers avoided him. Others watched him differently. He had texted her once 2 nights ago. They're quieter now. She didn't ask what he meant. She knew. Silence could mean protection, or could mean planning. Her phone buzzed. This time it was a number she didn't recognize. She let it go to voicemail. The message was brief. This is regarding the class action inquiry related to fleet safety oversight. So it had begun. She closed her eyes for a moment, not in frustration, in acceptance. This was the ripple. You don't change internal policy quietly in a corporation of that size. You expose fractures, and fractures attract attention. 2 days later, the board announced a decision. She remained CEO, conditional on quarterly review. Some members had voted for removal. Others had argued stability was more important than optics. It wasn't loyalty that saved her. It was practicality. She accepted the outcome without reaction. Her assistant looked relieved. "You survived," her assistant said. She looked at her. That wasn't the goal. Her assistant hesitated. What was? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she picked up her coat. "Schedule a press conference," she said. Her assistant blinked. "You said we wouldn't." "We won't spin," she replied. "We'll state facts." The press room was crowded. Cameras, flashes, speculation already forming in the air. She stepped to the podium without notes. The room quieted. She didn't start with apology. She didn't start with praise. She started with acknowledgement. 3 weeks ago, I was involved in a vehicle collision caused by brake failure in a contracted fleet truck, she said evenly. That failure followed a reported maintenance concern that was not addressed in time. Murmurs spread. She continued. The driver reported the issue. The system failed to respond appropriately. No blame shifting. No protective language. We are conducting full internal review. Maintenance deferral protocols have been suspended. Escalation pathways have been restructured. Accountability measures are ongoing. Questions exploded as soon as she paused. Are you admitting liability? Is this an attempt to shield yourself? Will there be resignations? She answered simply. This is an attempt to prevent recurrence. No drama. No performance. Afterward, commentators debated her tone. Some called it strategic humility. Others called it damage control. She didn't care, because somewhere across the city, a man's daughter wouldn't have to open the door to cameras again. That evening, Daniel came to her office without an appointment. Security called first. He says he just wants 5 minutes. She allowed it. He stepped inside slowly. He looked different, less tense, still cautious. I saw the conference, he said. She nodded. You didn't mention me by name. No. He swallowed. You didn't blame me. No. He studied her. They're talking about policy changes at the yard, he said. Drivers can report directly now. Yes. He let out a breath he'd probably been holding for weeks. They won't ignore it next time, he said quietly. No. Silence. He shifted his weight. They're saying you almost got fired, he added. Almost, she replied. He watched her carefully. Why didn't you fight quieter? He asked. You could have handled it internally. No noise. Yes, she said. Then why didn't you? She looked at him for a long moment. Because if I fixed it quietly, nothing would really change. But she didn't say it that way. She said, because quiet is how it broke. He held her gaze. That answer settled between them. Not dramatic, just true. He nodded slowly. My daughter asked about you, he said suddenly. Her expression shifted slightly. What did she ask? She wanted to know if you were mad at me. A pause. And what did you tell her? She asked. That you weren't. Another pause. She wanted to draw you something, he added, almost awkwardly. She blinked. That's not necessary. I know, he said. She's doing it anyway. Silence softened the room. For the first time since the accident, she felt something loosen inside her. Not guilt. Not obligation. Something quieter. Relief. He moved toward the door. He stopped before leaving. You changed more than policy, he said. She didn't respond. He continued. You changed how they look at us. Us. Drivers. Workers. People below the boardroom line. She watched him carefully. That wasn't charity, he added. That was something else. She didn't know what to call it. Neither did he. He nodded once. Then he left. She stood alone in her office again, city lights stretching beyond the glass. The board still watched her. Investors still questioned her. The company still needed to perform. Nothing had become easier. But something had become clearer. Power wasn't just about building. It was about what you allowed to break, and what you refused to ignore once you saw it. She touched her shoulder lightly. It still hurt, not as sharply, but enough to remind her. The accident had lasted seconds, The change would last longer, and for the first time in years, she felt like the weight she carried was chosen, not inherited, not automatic. Chosen. She thought it would feel like closure. It didn't. The policy changes went into effect. The audits continued. The terminations became public. The contractor filed a formal complaint claiming unfair treatment and scapegoating. She expected then. What she didn't expect was how many people inside her company quietly resisted the new system. Not openly, not in meetings, in small delays, in half-finished compliance reports, in passive language, in employees suddenly forgetting to respond to safety escalation emails. It wasn't sabotage in the obvious sense, it was something colder. A belief that this would pass, that she would tire out, that eventually she'd return to the normal rhythm of profit in silence. She recognized that belief because she had once relied on it herself. She had been the person who assumed nothing truly changed. Not at scale. Not for long. One afternoon, her assistant walked into her office with a thick file. "This is the full compliance review," she said. She took it. She didn't open it immediately. Instead, she watched her assistant's face. "What aren't you telling me?" she asked. Her assistant hesitated. "There's a problem with the contractor's legal team," she admitted. "They're preparing to shift blame back to Daniel, of course. He's the easiest target," her assistant added. "They want to paint him as negligent, claim he ignored warning signs." She stared at the file in her hands. Her first instinct was anger. Not loud anger, the kind that sat in her throat and made her jaw tighten. "What does Daniel say?" she asked. "He hasn't been told yet," her assistant replied. "We intercepted the filing." She nodded once. "Set a meeting," she said. "With legal?" "With Daniel," she corrected. Her assistant paused. "Today?" "Yes." "He arrived late. Not because he didn't care, because he had to pick his daughter up from school." She noticed that immediately. When he walked into her office, his jacket still smelled faintly of outside air. His hair was damp like he'd been caught in rain. His face carried the tiredness of a man who couldn't afford long pauses. He looked at her once and said, "What is it?" No greetings? No soft start. She respected that. She slid a copy of the draft filing across her desk. "They're coming after you," she said. He read the first page, then the second. His face didn't change much, but his eyes did. A tightness, a narrowing, something familiar. Not surprise, resignation. He set the papers down carefully. "So that's it," he said quietly. "No," she replied. He let out a short breath through his nose. "You can't stop them," he said. "They'll do what they do." "I can stop them," she said. That made him look at her sharply. "By destroying them?" he asked. The question wasn't accusing. It was tired. Like he didn't want another war, even if he deserved justice. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she asked, "Did you ignore warning signs?" "No," he said. "Did you drive recklessly?" "No." "Did you report the issue?" "Yes." "Then they're lying," she said. He stared at her. "Lying is cheap," he replied. "Truth costs money." That sentence stayed in the room. She stood and walked to the window. The city looked gray outside. Rain on glass. "I can cover your legal defense," she said without turning around. Daniel went still. "No," he said. She turned. "You don't get to refuse that," she said. His jaw tightened. "I'm not your project," he said. The words were sharp, but his voice wasn't cruel. She nodded once. "I know," she said, "but you're also not disposable." Silence. He looked down at the papers again. Then he said, quieter, "They'll ruin my name." She didn't soften her voice. She didn't comfort him. She said the truth. "They'll try." He looked at her again. "You can't fix everything," he said. She held his gaze. "No," she replied, "but I can fix this." He shook his head slowly, almost like he was exhausted by her certainty. "This is going to drag on," he warned. "Months. Maybe longer." "I know. And they'll make it ugly." "I know. And your board will hate it." She paused. Then she said, "They already do." Daniel studied her face for a long moment. He wasn't looking for weakness. He was looking for the point where she might back away. He didn't find it. He finally looked away. "Okay," he said, but it didn't sound like agreement. It sounded like surrender. She hated that. She hated that accepting help could feel like losing dignity. "I don't want you to owe me," she said. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Too late," he replied. That wasn't what he meant. He didn't mean money. He meant something heavier. That she had stepped into his life, and now nothing could go back to how it was. She understood that. She sat back down. "Your daughter," she said. "How is she?" Daniel's expression softened slightly, like the question forced him to breathe differently. "She's fine," he said, "but she's watching me more." "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "She checks if I'm still there," he admitted. "If I leave the room, she asks where I'm going. She didn't do that before." The words settled in her chest. Children didn't forget fear quickly. They just learned to live around it. She nodded once. "I'm sorry," she said. It was the first time she'd said those words to him. Not as a strategy, not as a public gesture, just as a fact. Daniel didn't respond right away. Then he said, "It wasn't your fault." She didn't argue, because fault wasn't the point anymore. Impact was. That night, alone in her apartment, she opened a file she hadn't touched in years. Not company documents, personal ones, a folder with old photographs, old records. Things she kept in a drawer because throwing them away felt like pretending she hadn't been that person once. There was a picture of her at 16. Thin, serious, eyes too sharp for her age. She stared at it for a long time. She remembered the feeling of being one paycheck away from collapse, one illness away from losing everything, the constant awareness that nobody was coming to save her. She hadn't thought about that girl in years. She had outgrown her. Or she'd buried her. But now she could feel her again, like a shadow pressed against her back. She understood Daniel's fear too well. She just hadn't let herself admit it. Her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. "My kid drew you something. I don't know how to give it to you." She stared at the text. Then she replied, "Bring it tomorrow. No one will see you." A few seconds passed. Then his response came. "Okay." She set the phone down. And for the first time since the accident, she felt something close to grief. Not for the crash. For all the years she had lived believing that being powerful meant being untouched. It never had. It had only meant she had the privilege of not noticing what touched everyone else. Now she was noticing, and she wasn't sure she could stop. He came the next afternoon. Not through the main entrance. Security let him in through the side elevator she used when she didn't want cameras. He looked uncomfortable in the quiet hallway, like the carpet was too thick and the walls too clean. He was holding a folded piece of paper. He didn't sit this time. He just stood there and held it out. "She said it's not very good," he muttered. She took it carefully with her uninjured hand. The paper was creased from being folded too tightly. When she opened it, she saw a drawing done in colored pencil. 2 cars. One red, one blue. The red one was upright. The blue one was slightly crooked. And between them, 2 stick figures. Above one was written "Dad." Above the other was written her name, spelled correctly. She stared at it longer than she meant to. In the corner, the child had drawn a small sun, bright yellow. Too big for the page. "She said she wanted to draw it different," Daniel said quietly, "but she said she didn't want you to look hurt." The words caught somewhere inside her chest. "She thinks if she draws it like that, it stays like that," he added. She folded the paper once, then unfolded it again. Carefully, as if it might tear. "She shouldn't have had to see that," she said. "No," he replied. Silence. It wasn't heavy this time. Just full. He shifted slightly. "They dropped the filing," he said. She looked up. "When?" "This morning. My lawyer said they withdrew the language about negligence." She nodded once. "I told you they would," she said. He studied her face. You didn't threaten them, he said. No. You didn't go to war. No. Then why did they stop? She held his gaze. Because they know what happens if I do. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Okay, he said. He wasn't impressed. He wasn't grateful. He just understood the balance. She placed the drawing on her desk instead of putting it away. That doesn't mean it's over, she said. I know, he replied. The class action inquiry is still active. He exhaled. I figured. But it's broader now, she added. It's not about you. He looked almost relieved by that. Good, he said. Because he was tired of being the center of something he never asked for. He moved toward the door. Then he stopped. She wanted me to ask you something, he said. She waited. She wanted to know if you're still mad at the truck. She blinked. Mad at the truck? He almost smiled. She says if it was broken, it's the truck's fault. The simplicity of it hit harder than any legal argument. She thought about the twisted metal, the shattered glass, about systems and signatures and memos. Then she said, No, I'm not mad at the truck. He nodded once. I'll tell her, he said. He left after that. No handshake, no ceremony, just a quiet exit. She stood there for a long time after the door closed, the drawing still on her desk, the sun too large, the cars too small. She walked over to the window and looked out at the city. Traffic moved like it always did. Deliveries, commuters, drivers trusting machines they didn't build. She used to look down at the city and see scale. Now she saw risk. She saw the invisible lines connecting decisions made in boardrooms to breaks on roads. She understood something she hadn't allowed herself to before. Power didn't protect you from consequence. It delayed it, or redirected it, but it never erased it. Her phone buzzed, a message from her assistant. Stock stabilizing. Media cycle shifting. Inquiry expanding to industry-wide review. She read it. Set the phone down. Industry-wide. That meant this wouldn't stay inside her company. It would ripple outward. Other contractors, other fleets, other executives forced to answer uncomfortable questions. She felt no pride in that, only steadiness. This was what staying looked like. Not dramatic speeches, not heroic gestures, just refusing to look away once you saw the fracture. Her shoulder still ached in cold weather. Doctors said it might for years. She didn't mind. Pain was memory. Memory kept her from slipping back into distance. She walked back to her desk and picked up the drawing. She placed it in a frame, not on the wall, on the shelf beside her desk, where she would see it every day. 2 cars. A crooked blue one. A sun too large. She sat down slowly, opened her laptop. There were still reports to review, policies to refine, people to argue with. Nothing about her life had become easier. But something inside her had shifted permanently. She no longer measured success only in growth. She measured it in what didn't break, in who didn't get ignored, in which warnings were taken seriously. The accident had lasted seconds. The consequences would last longer. And when she thought about that night, about the ticking metal and the man who didn't run, she no longer felt the tilt of losing control. She felt something steadier, a choice she had made, and would keep making. Not because it looked good, not because it was expected, but because she had heard him. And once you truly hear something like that, you don't get to pretend you didn't.